The retired samurai woke before dawn, as was his ritual, his body attuned to the hour when night yielded to the faintest whispers of light. The air clung to the lingering coolness of the night, heavy with the scent of damp earth and distant cedar, as he slid open the shoji screen with a quiet sigh. The tatami beneath his bare feet released a whisper of dried grass, clean and crisp, and the faint, milky aroma of fresh matcha from the hearth curled into the room, mingling with the sharp, iron-tinged memory of the forge that seemed to live in his pores. He knelt by the low table, the polished wood smooth beneath his trembling fingers, a tremor born not of age, but of the stillness that always settled in him before the day's work began. With deliberate slowness, he heated the water, the iron kettle's hum rising like a monk's chant, and poured it over the powdered tea, watching the green froth swirl into existence like the first leaves of spring. The bitterness on his tongue was a reminder, a familiar anchor once. He had drunk it before battle, steeling himself for the clash of steel. Now, it was a silent prayer, a balm for the ghosts that stirred in his chest when he reached for the hammer. Outside, the world blurred into shades of indigo and silver, the cobbled streets still slick with dew. The rhythmic clatter of a night watchman's geta fading into the distance. He rose, the silk of his kimono slipping cool against his skin, and stepped into the garden where the first bird song trembled in the branches above. The cherry blossoms had long since fallen, their petals dissolved into the earth, but their fleeting beauty lived in the blades he forged, folded steel, layered like memory, born of fire but shaped for ceremony. His hands had known the weight of a sword in war, had felt the sickening whisper of flesh parting beneath its edge, yet now, when he closed his eyes, he saw not blood, but the slow curl of steam from the tempering trough, the way the molten metal sighed as it met the water, as if exhaling its fury into something purer. In the forge, the coals glowed like the embers of a dying battlefield, but here, there was no screaming, no stench of scorched leather or gutted horses. Only the steady hiss of bellows, the creak of the grinding wheel, the scent of pine charcoal and oiled steel. He ran a calloused thumb along the unfinished blade, feeling the ridges where the folds met, each layer a silent plea for peace, for redemption, for the gods to turn their faces away from war. He could still hear the screams if he listened too closely, could still feel the way his breath had locked in his chest the first time he took a life, the way his sword had trembled not with fear, but with the terrible understanding that it would never be clean again. Yet now, with each strike of the hammer, he poured his breath into the metal, folding it inward like a secret, like the sutras chanted by monks at daybreak. The rhythm was a meditation, the heat a crucible not for destruction, but for transformation. By midday, the light shifted, slanting through the open doors in golden rivulets, catching the dust motes that danced like sparks above the anvil. He paused, wiping his brow with the back of his hand, and in that stillness, he felt it the fragile, fleeting peace that came not from forgetting, but from shaping something beautiful from the ashes of what he had been. The sword would never taste blood. It would rest in silk, be raised in ceremony, its edge a symbol of restraint rather than violence. And perhaps, he thought, as he lifted the hammer once more, that was the only atonement worth seeking, not in renunciation, but in creation, in the quiet certainty that the hands that had once dealt death could now coax life from fire. The morning air, crisp with the lingering chill of night, drifts through the open shoji screens of his workshop, carrying the faintest scent of dew-dampened moss from the garden outside. The tatami beneath his knees releases a dry, grassy perfume as he shifts slightly, settling into seiza, the posture both familiar and demanding. His calloused hands rest on his thighs, thumbs gently touching a bridge between discipline and ease. The sharp, clean aroma of freshly whisked matcha rises from the bowl beside him, its bitterness a ghost on his tongue even before he lifts it. He closes his eyes, letting the silence press against him, though it is never truly silent. The distant call of a crow, the rustle of wind through bamboo, the almost imperceptible creak of the wooden beams as the sun's first light warms them. His breath slows, measured inhale, exhale each cycle, a step farther from the restless dreams that still sometimes come. The ones where steel clashes and the air smells of smoke and iron. He focuses on the present, the cool, smooth grain of the wooden floor beneath his fingers, the way his spine aligns like a well-balanced blade. A tremor flutters in his left hand, not from fear, but from memory, the weight of 1,000 swords drawn, 1,000 lives taken. He quiets it with another breath. Today, he will forge not for war, but for ceremony. The blade will be a prayer folded into steel, its edge sharp enough to cut the air but never flesh. The charcoal in the forge murmurs as it breathes, the sound echoing his own rhythm. Outside, the first notes of the neighborhood stir the rhythmic clatter of geta on cobblestone, the murmur of voices, the cart wheels rolling toward the market, life ordinary and sacred. He opens his eyes, letting the light, golden as a maple leaf in autumn, wash over the simple tools laid before him. The hammer, the tongs, the wading billet of tamahagging. The metal is patient. It has waited centuries in the earth. It can wait a little longer for his hands to become worthy of shaping it. His fingers brush the cool silk of his work apron, the fabric worn smooth by years of use. And for a moment, he feels the presence of all the smiths who came before him, their whispers woven into the wind. The forge's heat will come, the metal will glow, and he will meet it not as a warrior, but as a craftsman, each strike of the hammer a sutra, each fold a repentance, until the blade sings with the quiet of morning mist over the river, until it carries peace as surely as it carries its edge. The tea has cooled. He drinks it anyway, the bitterness a reminder, the warmth a blessing. The day begins. The morning sunlight filters through the paper shoji screens, casting a honeyed glow over the blacksmith's workshop, where the scent of freshly woven tatami mats mingles with the faint, metallic tang of oiled steel. The retired samurai, now a craftsman of ceremonial blades, kneels before the unworked metal, his calloused fingers brushing over its surface with the reverence of a priest handling sacred texts. His hands, once swift and sure in the chaos of battle, now move with deliberate slowness, tracing the steel's undulating grain as if reading its hidden history. The air is still, save for the distant murmur of the village awakening, the rhythmic clatter of wooden geta on cobblestones, the hushed rustle of silk as a neighbor passes by, the whisper of wind through the pines outside. He closes his eyes, exhales, and in that breath, the past rises unbidden, the scream of arrows splitting the air, the sticky warmth of blood on his palms, the way his sword, once an extension of his soul, had felt heavier with each life it took. His fingers tighten imperceptibly around the steel, a tremor betraying the memory's grip. But then, the present returns, the cool touch of the metal beneath his fingertips, the bitterness of matcha still lingering on his tongue from his morning meditation, the distant chime of a temple bell marking the hour. He opens his eyes. This steel, flawless and unmarred, is not destined for war. It will bear no scars, only prayers, each fold of the blade a silent plea for peace, each strike of the hammer an act of atonement. He turns the metal toward the light, watching the way it catches the dawn, and for a moment it seems to hum, as if the gods themselves have blessed it. His breath steadies. The past is a shadow, but here, in the quiet discipline of his craft, in the way the steel yields to his touch like a promise, he finds a balance, not the absence of violence, but the transcendence of it. The blade, when finished, will be a bridge between worlds. The sharp, imperceptible whisper of its draw a reminder of what was, its ceremonial purpose, a testament to what could be. And so he begins, the hammer's first strike echoing like a heartbeat, a rhythm as old as the earth, as endless as the turning of the seasons. The forge roared to life as he knelt before it, the sudden eruption of flames casting long, trembling shadows across the workshop's worn wooden beams. The heat pressed against his skin, a familiar embrace, as he fed charcoal into the belly of the fire, each piece settling with a soft, crumbling sigh. The scent of burning oak and iron dust filled the air, mingling with the faint, lingering aroma of green tea steeped too long, bitter on his tongue that sat cooling beside him. Outside, the world was still, the cobbled street beyond his door silent, but for the distant clatter of geta sandals and the whisper of wind through the eaves. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the past in the quiet, the memories of battle etched into his bones, the screams of horses and men that sometimes still haunted the edges of his dreams. But here, in the rhythmic pulse of the forge, in the deliberate act of creation, he sought something purer. The steel before him, raw and unformed, was more than metal. It was a prayer folded into itself, a silent plea for peace forged in fire. His hands, rough and scarred, trembled slightly as he adjusted the tongs, the tremor not from age alone, but from the gravity of his task. He breathed deeply, the air thick with the tang of molten ore, and focused on the dance of the flames, blue at their core, gold at their edges, like the shifting hues of dawn over a battlefield long abandoned. The blade he would shape today would never taste blood. It would rest in the hands of a priest, lifted skyward in ceremony, its edge honed not for death, but for the slicing of sacred rope, the parting of the mundane from the divine. The forge's glow illuminated the calligraphy on the far wall, a single character Wa, harmony painted in strokes as deliberate as his hammer falls. He exhaled slowly, as if emptying himself of the old violence, making room for the quiet mastery of the craft. The steel began to glow, a dull red deepening to cherry, then to the molten gold of a setting sun. In its transformation, he saw the cycle of all things, the ore pulled from the earth, the fire that shaped it, the hands that gave it purpose. And as he lifted the hammer, its weight familiar as a sword's hilt once had been, he brought it down not in anger, but in reverence, each strike a mantra, each fold in the steel a step closer to absolution. The forge exhaled its warmth into the pre-dawn chill, the scent of burning pine charcoal mingling with the faint, clean aroma of tatami mats from the adjacent room, where a single cup of freshly whisked matcha sat steaming, its bitterness a familiar companion. The retired samurai, now a blacksmith of ceremonial blades, lifted his hammer, its worn handle smooth against his calloused palm. As the first strike fell, the resonant clang echoed like a distant battlefield gong, and for a heartbeat, his hands trembled, not from fatigue, but memory. He saw the mist-shrouded plains of his youth, the crimson bloom of banners, the silent collapse of men whose names he'd never known. The metal beneath his hammer was red-hot, pliant, alive just as his past was, though he'd spent years tempering it like steel. The rhythm of his strikes became a mantra, each impact a plea to the gods of fire and iron to purify not just the blade, but himself. Outside, the wind sighed through the bamboo grove, its whisper a counterpoint to the metallic song of his labor, while the distant clatter of guitar on cobblestones marked the waking world moving on, oblivious to his quiet reckonings. He paused, letting the hammer hang heavy in his grip, and closed his eyes. The air smelled of ozone and ash, of salt from his own sweat. In the stillness, he heard the almost imperceptible shink of a katana being drawn, a memory sound, the ghost of a life where his hands were quick with violence, not creation. He exhaled slowly, the breath leaving his lungs like a retreating tide, and focused on the present. The cool touch of the grinding stone under his fingertips, the way the morning light, thin and golden, spilled across the workshop floor, illuminating motes of dust that danced like fleeting spirits. This blade would never taste blood. It would rest in stillness, adorned in silk, a vessel for prayers. The thought soothed him, yet the weight of his past lingered like an old wound aching before rain. He dipped the glowing steel into the quenching bucket, and the water hissed, sending up a plume of steam that curled like incense toward the ceiling. In that cloud, he imagined the faces of the fallen, their voices murmuring in the crackle of the coals. Had he honored them? Could peace be as sacred as valor? The questions hung unanswered, but the ritual of his craft anchored him. With each fold of the metal, he buried another shadow of his youth, layer upon layer, until the blade emerged not flawless, but forged with intention. The smooth polish of the finished tanto caught the light, its surface a mirror to the sky outside, where cherry petals drifted like snow. He ran a thumb along the spine, feeling the harmony of its balance, and for the first time that morning, his shoulders relaxed. The past was a weight, yes, but also a whetstone, sharpening him into something new. The temple bell tolled in the distance, its deep vibrations humming through his ribs, and as he knelt on the tatami to sip his now-cooled tea, its bitterness tasted not of sorrow, but of clarity. The day stretched before him, quiet and purposeful, and in the rhythm of his breath, he found the echo of an unspoken vow. To bend the violence of fire into beauty, and to carry the dead with him, not as ghosts, but as witnesses to his peace. The morning sun filtered through the paper shoji screens, casting a soft gold over the quiet workshop, where the scent of clean tatami mingled with the faint bitterness of freshly whisked matcha. The retired samurai, now a blacksmith of ceremonial blades, sat motionless before the low table, his calloused hands resting on his knees, the tremor in his left thumb a relic of an old wound barely noticeable. The rhythmic clatter of Geta sandals echoed from the cobbled street outside, a distant cadence that seemed to measure the stillness within. The apprentice, a young man with eager eyes and restless fingers, knelt at the threshold, holding his breath as if afraid to disturb the air. The master did not turn, his gaze fixed on the katana laid before him, its blade a silent river of folded steel catching the light like a whispered promise. He could still hear the sharp, almost imperceptible sound of a sword being drawn in the dead of night, the memory clinging to him like the scent of blood after rain. His chest rose slowly, a deliberate breath, as if by exhaling he could purge the ghosts that lingered in the corners of his mind. The tatami beneath him smelled of straw and sun, and the polished wood of the scabbard under his fingers was cool, smooth as a prayer. Once he had forged blades for war, their edges hungry. Now each stroke of his hammer was a meditation, each fold of steel a sutra for peace. The apprentice shifted, the rustle of his hakama loud in the hush, but the master remained still, caught between the past's grip and the present's fragile grace. Outside, a breeze stirred the cherry blossoms, their petals drifting like ashes. He wondered if the boy could see the weight in his silence, if he understood that mastery was not just in the shaping of steel, but in the quieting of the soul. The blade before him was flawless, yet it would never taste battle. Its purpose now was to honor, to bridge the living and the divine. its edge a line between violence and reverence. The apprentice leaned forward, his youth a bright, impatient thing. But the master closed his eyes, listening to the distant hum of the forge, the murmur of the wind through bamboo. Some truths could not be spoken, only forged in the heat of patience, in the slow turning of seasons. The gods, if they listened, knew the weight of a repentant hand. And so he waited, breathing in the tang of tea and iron, until the moment stretched thin as the horizon at dawn, until the boy's impatience gave way to the first lesson. Stillness. The forge exhaled a sigh of heat, the air shimmering above the coals like the ghosts of old battles. The retired samurai, his calloused hands wrapped in a stained cloth, turned the unfinished blade in the flames, watching the steel blush from dull red to a vibrant orange, the color of autumn maples. Of sunsets he once glimpsed between skirmishes. The rhythmic clang of his hammer filled the small workshop, each strike precise, measured, a meditation in metal. Behind him, the scent of fresh tatami, sun-warmed straw and clean hemp mingled with the tang of quenching water, and the faint, bitter note of green tea cooling beside an untouched cup. His fingers trembled, not from fatigue but from memory. The whisper of a katana drawn in haste, the sticky grip of a hilt slick with rain and blood. He paused, breath held, as the coals crackled. The blade, still rough, pulsed with potential beneath his touch, its curve echoing the arc of a temple bell's silence. Outside, wind stirred the cherry blossoms. Petals clung to the cobbled street like pale embers, their fleeting beauty a mute reminder of the impermanence he now served instead of severing. He dipped the steel into the trough, and the water hissed like 100 swords sheathed at once. Steam rose in curling tendrils, carrying with it the ghosts of his past, the cries of war, the weight of armor, the way the moonlight used to glint on freshly wetted edges. Now his tools were different. Patience, not peril, the slow coaxing of form from chaos. The polished wood of his workbench, cool beneath his palms, grounded him. This blade would never taste battle. It would rest in sacred spaces. Its edge a silent prayer folded into steel. Its purpose not to cleave, but to connect to the gods, to the quietude of dawn meditation, to the generations of smiths who had forged beauty from fire. As he raised the hammer again, his chest tightened with the old ache, the dissonance between the hands that had taken life and those that now gifted it. But the metal sang beneath his touch, and in its crude shape, he saw the promise of something whole, something holy. The shop darkened as a cloud passed over the sun, and for a heartbeat, the samurai was back in the rain-swept fields, the air thick with the iron scent of war. Then the light returned, and with it, the steady rhythm of his breath, the present, the peace, the pact he had made with himself. The blade, still imperfect, would bear the marks of its making, just as he bore his scars. And in that union of flaw and forge, he found his absolution. The workshop was steeped in the quiet reverence of a shrine, the scent of freshly woven tatami mingling, with the earthy aroma of powdered green tea left to settle in a chipped bowl. The retired samurai, now a blacksmith of ceremonial blades, let his calloused fingers hover over the newly forged steel. The heat, radiating in trembling waves that warped the air like the memory of battles long past. With deliberate care, he lifted the glowing blade, its edge trembling in the dim light like a half-remembered threat. The water trough awaited, its surface still as a moonlit pond, and as he submerged the steel, the hiss of steam erupted like a whispered confession, sudden and unavoidable. The sound clawed at the silence, echoing the way his passed his cuts through flesh. The cries swallowed by wind still rose uninvited in the stillness of meditation. He closed his eyes, the damp coolness of the workshop clinging to his skin as the blade darkened, its heat surrendering to the water's embrace. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of geta on cobblestones marked the passage of hurried lives, a world unconcerned with a smith's private reckoning. Yet in his hands, the steel took on weight beyond metal history, prayer, the fragile balance between violence and devotion. His breath slowed, matching the steady drip of water from the quenching trough. And for the briefest moment, he wondered if peace was ever truly forged, or if it simply lingered in the pauses between actions, in the space between the hiss and the silence that followed. The polished wooden hilt, yet to be wrapped in silk, felt cool against his palm, a promise, or perhaps an apology. The scent of scorched metal faded as the afternoon light shifted across the floor, thin as the veil between his past and present, between the warrior he had been and the craftsman he had chosen to become. When the blade was cool, he lifted it once more, watching the daylight catch its unmarred surface, and his fingers traced the ridge where steel met water, where fire met absolution. Outside, the wind stirred, carrying the faint chime of temple bells, as if the gods themselves were whispering of cycles of swords turned to plows, of hands that once gripped swords now cradling creation. The scent of fresh tatami mingled with the faint, earthy bitterness of green tea left cooling beside him, a fragile piece in the quiet forge. The retired samurai, now a blacksmith of ceremony, not war, ran his calloused fingers along the unfinished blade's curve, feeling the slightest unevenness where the steel resisted perfection. His breath stilled, amplifying the whisper of morning birds outside and the distant clatter of wooden geta on cobblestones as the village awoke. The blade caught the pale dawn light filtering through rice paper screens, its surface a murky mirror reflecting not just his weathered face, but the ghosts of his past, the clash of steel, the choked screams of battlefields, the way a katana's drawn edge had once sung with hunger. His thumb trembled against the metal, not from age, but from the memory of its weight in his grip, the way it had carved through flesh as easily as his hammer now shaped unheated steel. With deliberate slowness, he set the blade aside. The forge's embers pulsed like a heartbeat as he knelt before them, the ritual of tending the fire a meditation in itself. The air smelled of charred oak and iron, the heat pressing against his skin like an old, insistent companion. He folded his legs onto the smooth, cool wooden floor, the silk of his frayed hakama whispering against the grain, and exhaled into the silence. This was his prayer, now the careful coaxing of metal into something worthy of adornment, not slaughter. Each strike of his hammer was a sutra, each fold of the steel an attempt to bury the violence of his hands beneath layers of discipline. But the past lingered. Some nights, he startled awake to the phantom taste of blood in his mouth, the echo of war drums in his pulse. He lifted the blade again, turning it toward the light. A flaw almost invisible, curved near the tip, a distraction to the untrained eye, but to him, a betrayal of purpose. The smith's art demanded surrender, and so he would begin anew. The furnace roared as he fed it, sparks rising like fireflies toward the soot-stained rafters. The blade glowed cherry red in the tong's grasp, its imperfections malleable once more. Steam hissed as he plunged it into the water trough, the scent of quenching iron sharp and primal. It fogged his vision, and for a moment he saw not the forge, but the mist-wreathed temples of his youth, the monks who had taught him that a sword's soul was shaped as much by the heart as the hand. Outside, the wind stirred the cherry blossoms. Petals brushed the window like fleeting promises. He inhaled, absorbing the fragile sweetness, and returned to the anvil. The hammer fell in rhythmic strikes, each blow a pact not with the gods of war, but with the quiet deities of patience, of renewal. The steel bent, yielded, transformed. His muscles remembered old tensions, but his mind clung to the present. The way the metal shimmered like a river under moonlight, the way his breath synced with the strikes, the stillness that settled between them. By evening, the blade would be reborn. And when it was fitted into its lacquered saya, wrapped in silk for some noble's display, no one would know the remorse folded into its layers, the prayers beaten into its edge. But he would, and in that knowing, perhaps, lay the peace he sought not in forgetting, but in reshaping what remained. The young apprentice stood transfixed, as the old samurai's weathered hands moved over the blade, each motion a testament to decades of discipline. The forge was quiet now, the fire banked to embers, and the only sounds were the faint creak of the wooden floor beneath the tatami mats and the delicate whisper of steel being drawn from its sheath. A sound so sharp, it seemed to hang in the air like the lingering scent of fresh green tea, bitter and clean on the tongue. The samurai's hands, scarred from battles long past, trembled imperceptibly as they traced the curve of the katana. His fingers pausing where the temper line wavered like a distant mountain range. He exhaled slowly, the deep breath of a man who had learned to measure time in heartbeats rather than seconds. And the scent of pine, resin from the polishing stone, mingled with the faint metallic tang of the blade. Outside, the wind rustled through the cherry blossoms, their petals clinging stubbornly to the branches despite the season's turn, a fleeting reminder of impermanence. The apprentice dared not speak, for he knew this was no mere craft, it was ceremony, a silent prayer forged in steel. The samurai's eyes, half-lidded in meditation, betrayed nothing of the storms within. The memory of blood on snow, the weight of a sword meant for cutting flesh, not shaping peace. Yet here, in the stillness of the workshop, he sought mastery not over men, but over himself. The rhythmic tap of his chisel against the tang was deliberate, each strike a vow to honor the dead, to atone, to mend what had been broken. The blade caught the shifting light, its surface pooling like liquid moonlight, and for a moment, the past and present blurred. He remembered the way silk had felt against his skin when he once wore armor, the cool smoothness of lacquered wood beneath his palms as he knelt before generals now replaced by the rough grain of the workbench. The calluses earned not in war, but in creation. The apprentice watched as the samurai lifted the sword, testing its balance with a reverence usually reserved for the gods. The edge was flawless, not sharpened for battle, but for beauty, its purpose transformed like the man who held it. The old warrior's thumb brushed the tsuba, the guard carved with the motif of a crane in flight, symbol of longevity, of grace amidst chaos. A single petal drifted through the open shoji, landing soundlessly on the folded silk of the sword's sheath, and the samurai smiled faintly. Somewhere beyond the workshop, the rhythmic clatter of geta echoed on cobbled streets, a distant reminder of the world moving forward. But here, time stretched, suspended between the strike of the hammer and the silence that followed. The blade was finished not a weapon, but an offering. And in that moment, as the last ember sighed into ash, the samurai found not peace, perhaps, but the quiet strength to keep seeking it. The morning sun filtered through the paper shoji screens, casting a soft golden glow over the blacksmith's workshop, where the scent of fresh tatami mingled with the faint, metallic tang of polished steel. The retired samurai, now a humble artisan, knelt upon the woven mats, his calloused hands resting on his thighs, the smooth silk of his hakama cool against his skin. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of geta echoed against the cobbled streets, a distant reminder of the world beyond his quiet refuge. He inhaled deeply, the bitterness of freshly whisked matcha lingering on his tongue, its warmth a fleeting comfort against the memories that stirred within him. The blade before him, a katana forged not for battle, but for ceremony, gleamed in the muted light, its edge so sharp it seemed to hum when drawn, a sound so subtle it bordered on prayer. His fingers trembled as they traced the hamon, the wavier pattern in the steel like the ghost of a flame, a reminder of the fire that had shaped it and the fire that had once shaped him. In the silence, his mind wandered back to another dawn, decades past, when his hands had been stained not with soot but with blood. The weight of his old sword had been different then, heavier with purpose, with duty, with regret. He squeezed his eyes shut, the scent of cherry blossoms so fleeting, so fragile, filling his senses, a cruel contrast to the iron stench of battlefields long gone. He had sworn an oath then, kneeling in the ruins of a village razed to ash, his sword slick with the consequences of war. Never again, he had vowed, never again would he forge a weapon meant for senseless violence. The memory coiled around his ribs like smoke, tightening with every breath. A bird sang outside, its melody weaving through the distant chime of temple bells, and he exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing with the deliberate slowness of a man mastering his own spirit. The katana before him was not a tool of death, but a vessel of peace, its creation a meditation. Each fold of steel infused with silent prayers to the gods of mercy and the ancestors who watched from the inky depths of history. He ran his thumb along the tsuka, the polished wood smooth beneath his touch, the same way his fingers had once traced the hilt of his old sword before battle. But this was different. The blade was an offering, a plea woven into steel, a testament to the fragile balance between the violence he had known and the harmony he now sought. The workshop smelled of burning charcoal and the earthy dampness of morning dew. The air, thick with the quiet reverence of a sacred space. Outside, petals from the plum tree drifted past the open door, carried by a breeze that whispered of renewal. His hands, steadier now, reached for the chisel as he began to carve the May, his signature, his promise into the tang. Each stroke was measured, deliberate, the act itself a kind of sutra, a mantra in metal. The clang of the hammer, the hiss of heated steel thrust into water, these were not echoes of war, but the rhythms of creation, of a man reforging himself as surely as he shaped the blade. And when the work was done, the katana resting in its silk-clad saya, he knelt once more, his palms pressed together. The bitterness of the tea had faded, replaced by the clean, quiet satisfaction of a vow upheld. The past would always linger, a shadow at the edge of his vision. But here, in the stillness of his craft, he had found something akin to peace. Not the absence of memory, but the mastery of it, the alchemy of turning regret into reverence, violence into ceremony. The blade, now complete, would never taste blood, and neither, he hoped, would his soul ever thirst for it again. The afternoon sun slanted through the shoji screens, painting the forge in stripes of gold and shadow. The air, thick with the scent of burning pine charcoal and the metallic tang of steel. The retired samurai knelt before his workbench, the tatami beneath him, releasing the faint, clean aroma of rush grass, mingling with the bitter steam of green tea cooling at his side. His calloused hands moved with practiced precision, folding the steel, each hammer strike a whisper of discipline, each pause to examine the glowing metal, a meditation. The rhythm was familiar, almost sacred, the hiss of the bellows, the crackle of the fire, the way his breath synchronized with the rise and fall of his mallet. Yet, beneath the tranquility, Memories curled like smoke at the edges of his mind, the scream of battle, the weight of a bloodied katana in his grip. The way the morning mist over old battlefields had smelled of iron and damp earth. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the past dissipate like steam from the quenching bucket. The forge was his sanctuary now. Each blade he crafted a silent prayer. The shink of the polishing stone against the nascent katana was sharper than the distant cry of crows outside. A sound that once would have sent his hand flying to his hilt. Now it merely made him exhale, slow and controlled, as he turned the blade to catch the light. The steel gleamed like still water, and in its surface, he glimpsed not his own reflection, but the faces of those he'd lost, friends, foes, all blurred into the same sorrow. His fingers trembled slightly against the cool metal, not from age, but from the weight of memory. Outside, the wind stirred the maple leaves, their rustling like the faintest applause. He lifted the tea to his lips, the bitterness grounding him, the heat seeping into his bones. The workshop was alive with small, sacred details. The smoothness of the magnolia wood handle taking shape under his knife, the way the silk wrapping whispered against his palm, the faint, incense-like scent of the oil he used to polish the finished blades. Each motion was a stitch in the fabric of his repentance. Each finished sword not a weapon, but a plea to the gods, to the spirits of the fallen, to the relentless turning of the seasons that demanded growth from decay. The light shifted as clouds passed over the sun, and for a heartbeat, the room darkened. He paused, listening to the distant clatter of guitar on cobblestones as villagers passed by, their laughter foreign yet comforting. Once he had walked those streets with the wary stride of a warrior. Now he moved as a craftsman, his shadow no longer that of a killer, but of a man who had shaped violence into something quieter, truer. The blade before him was nearly complete, its curve a mirror of the crescent moon that would rise later, a reminder of cycles and second chances. As the day deepened, so did his focus. The regrets that had gnawed at him like winter wind lost their edge, dulled by the steady repetition of his work. The katana was no longer just steel, it was the stillness between heartbeats, the space between breaths, the fragile, boundless peace he had spent a lifetime searching for. And when he finally laid the finished sword upon the silk, its surface flawless as a frozen pond, he knew it would carry his silence into the world, a testament to the harmony he had forged between who he had been and who he had become. The blade emerged from the quenching bath with a hiss, the steam curling upward like the ghost of a long-forgotten battle cry. And as the metal cooled, it sang a high, crystalline note that hung in the still air of the forge before dissolving into silence. The retired samurai, now a blacksmith whose hands shaped not instruments of death, but vessels of prayer, exhaled slowly, his breath mingling with the lingering mist. The scent of fresh tatami mats and the earthy bitterness of matcha from the nearby tearoom drifted through the open shoji screens, blending with the acrid tang of heated steel. His calloused fingers, steady despite the years, traced the blade's flawless surface, smooth as a river stone, cool to the touch yet humming with latent energy. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of wooden guitar on cobbled streets echoed, a distant reminder of the world moving on of a life he had once known, where the whisper of a drawn katana was a prelude to violence, not the quiet ritual of creation. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of memory. The sticky heat of summer battles, the metallic sting of blood in the air, the way the setting sun had turned the fields to fire. His hands had once trembled after combat, not from fatigue, but from the unspeakable stillness that followed carnage. Now, they trembled only in meditation, when the past threatened to rise like a specter. The blade before him was his antithesis, its beauty born not of destruction, but of patience. Each fold of steel, a sutra folded into metal. Each hammer strike a mantra. The forge's glow flickered across its surface, catching the faint ripple of the grain, like waves on a moonlit shore. He had learned, through years of disciplined breaths and the slow mastery of his craft, that peace was not the absence of war, but the presence of something quieter, something as deliberate as the turn of seasons or the growth of bamboo, strong yet yielding. The sound of the wind chime outside, stirred by a passing breeze, pulled him back. He dipped a cloth in oil and began to polish the blade, the motion rhythmic, reverent. The steel drank in the light, reflecting not just his face, but the 1,000 faces of smiths and warriors before him, their spirits woven into the iron's memory. He wondered if his own silent prayers for peace would linger in the metal, if someday, in the hands of another, the blade might whisper of something beyond conflict. The afternoon light shifted, casting long shadows across the workshop, and for a moment, the scent of cherry blossoms fleeting, fragile drifted in, a reminder of life's impermanence. He lifted the blade, turning it gently, watching as the light danced along its edge. It was flawless, yes, but its true beauty lay in what it would never do. It would never taste blood. And in that, he found his absolution. The clang of a distant temple bell told the hour, its deep resonance vibrating through the floorboards, through his bones. He placed the blade on a stand of polished cedar, its surface as smooth as silk, and knelt before it, hands resting on his thighs. The forge's heat had faded, replaced by the evening's cool embrace. He breathed in and out, and for the first time that day, the past did not stir. The blade, now still, seemed to breathe with him, a silent companion in the long, slow work of peace. The morning sun filtered through the paper screens, casting a honeyed glow over the small workshop, where the scent of freshly woven tatami mingled with the metallic tang of oil and steel. The retired samurai, now a blacksmith of ceremonial blades, knelt before the unfinished katana, his calloused hands moving with the precision of a man who had once known violence intimately. The blade, still raw from the forge, caught the light as he lifted it, the edge whispering against the whetstone in a sound so faint it might have been the breath of a ghost. His thumb traced the temper line, the hamon, where the steel's soul revealed itself in rippling waves, a testament to the dance between fire and water, destruction and rebirth. Each stroke of the stone was a meditation, a ritual of atonement. The rhythm of his breath synced with the scrape of metal, slow and deliberate, as if he could grind away the weight of his past. The tea beside him had gone cold, its bitterness untouched, but he scarcely noticed his mind was elsewhere, caught between the stillness of the workshop and the distant echoes of battlefields, where steel had sung a different song. Memories flickered like shadows. The weight of armor pressing into his shoulders, the deafening cry of war horns, the slick warmth of blood on his palms. He tightened his grip on the whetstone, forcing himself back to the present, to the cool kiss of morning air on his skin, to the way the blade's surface darkened under his touch, revealing a mirror-like finish that reflected not just his face, but the faint tremor in his fingers, a tremor that had once been steadied by Chinese letter, now steadied by creation. The sword was no longer a tool of war. In his hands, it became an offering, a silent prayer folded into steel. Every curve, every balance point was a defiance of the chaos he had once wrought, a harmony forged in stillness. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of geta on cobblestones marked the passage of villagers' lives untouched by the blade's hunger, and for a moment, he envied their innocence. Yet, as the light shifted, painting the blade in liquid gold, he felt something deeper than envy stir within him. This was his kintsugi, his broken pieces mended not with gold, but with discipline. The hours bowed over the forge, the blistered hands, the ache in his knees from long nights of meditation beneath the same moon that had once illuminated battles. He exhaled, long and slow, watching as his breath misted over the steel, a fleeting cloud against perfection. The sword was complete, yet his work was never done. Each blade he crafted carried not just his name, but his hope that the world might one day forget the sharpness of a katana's bite and remember only its beauty, the way it caught the light like a river at dawn, the way it balanced grace and lethality without yielding to either. He set the blade down on a sheet of rice paper, its edge gleaming like a sliver of the horizon, and for the first time that morning, he reached for the tea. The bitterness lingered on his tongue, a reminder that peace, like mastery, was not sweet, it was earned, sip by sip, stroke by stroke. The wind chime by the window stirred, its hollow notes scattering like petals on water, and he closed his eyes, listening. Somewhere beyond the workshop, beyond the village, the world turned, and wars were still waged. But here, in this quiet space between breaths, between the clang of the forge and the sigh of the wind, he had found something unbreakable, not the fragile peace of a world without conflict, but the steady, unyielding peace of a man who had learned to wield his past like a blade. With reverence, with sorrow, and above all, with hands that could now shape something kinder. The forge was quiet now, the fires banked to embers, the hammer stilled. The retired samurai knelt on the worn tatami, the clean scent of straw and polished wood mingling with the faint metallic tang of the blade before him. Outside, the evening air carried the whisper of cherry blossoms drifting to the cobbled street, where the rhythmic clatter of geta sandals faded into the dusk. He lifted the unfinished katana, its tang the hidden spine of the sword cool against his calloused fingers. Here, where the blade would be wrapped in silk and bound to the hilt, he would leave his secret. His breath slowed, matching the steady pulse of the night insects as he reached for the chisel. The tool trembled slightly in his grip, not from weakness, but from the weight of memory. The shudder of steel through flesh, the cries of battle, the way the earth had steamed with blood under a pitiless sun. He exhaled, long and deliberate, as if to purge the past with the air from his lungs. The chisel bit into the metal with a whisper, each delicate stroke a counterpoint to the violence the blade might once have wrought. He carved not for war, but for ceremony, for the silent dances of peace, where the sword's edge would never taste flesh. The characters took shape under his hands, a prayer, hidden, known only to him and the gods. The act felt like atonement, a sutra written in steel. The scent of green tea, bitter and cleansing, rose from the cup beside him, its steam curling like incense in the dim light. He paused, fingertips brushing the freshly engraved characters, feeling the ridges where his hope met the unyielding metal. A moth fluttered against the lantern, casting fleeting shadows across the workshop shadows that flickered like the ghosts of his former life. He remembered the way moonlight once glinted on drawn blades, the sharp, almost imperceptible sound of a katana leaving its scabbard, a sound like fate unfolding. Now, the only sharpness was the focus of his craft, the discipline of his hands. The wood beneath him was smooth, worn by years of meditation, and the silk of his robes whispered as he shifted, settling deeper into stillness. The forge's heat had faded, leaving the air cool, fragrant with the iron's memory of fire. He lifted the tang to the light, watching the prayer catch the glow, a fragile thing, etched into something unbreakable. It was a covenant, this hidden word, a promise to the earth that had borne his footsteps, both as a warrior and a man who now walked softly. The cherry blossoms outside would fall, the seasons would turn, and the swords he forged would outlive him, their edges unbloodied, their purpose pure. In this moment, between the strike of the chisel and the silence that followed, he found it, the profound peace of mastery, the quietude of a life honed as finely as the blade beneath his hands. The past was a shadow, the present a breath, and the future a prayer folded into steel. The morning air carried the crisp scent of pine and incense as the retired samurai, now a blacksmith of prayer-laden blades, walked the worn, cobbled path to the shrine, his geta clattering like a slow, steady heartbeat against the stones. The katana at his side no longer a weapon, but a vessel of peace rested in its silk-wrapped saya, its presence as light as a whisper, yet heavy with intention. His calloused fingers traced the smooth lacquer of the scabbard, feeling the echoes of every strike of the hammer, every fold of the steel, every silent plea for tranquility he had forged into its core. The shrine gates loomed ahead, their vermilion paint glowing like embers in the dawn light, and for a breath he paused, the weight of memory pressing against his ribs. Years ago, his hands had been stained with the grit of battle, his katana singing not for ceremony but for survival. Now, the sharp, almost imperceptible sound of the blade being drawn would only ever be for blessing, for ritual, for the quietude he had spent a lifetime learning to crave. The scent of fresh tatami and bitter matcha drifted from the open shoji screens, mingling with the earthy dampness of dew-kissed moss underfoot, and he inhaled deeply, steadying the tremor in his hands not from fear, but from the solemnity of this surrender. As he knelt before the shrine's keepers, the polished wood of the floor cool beneath his knees, he unwrapped the blade with the precision of a man who had spent decades mastering both war and its absence. The steel caught the light, throwing fleeting reflections like koi darting in a pond. And for a moment, he saw not the sword, but the faces of those he had lost to battle, to time, to the unyielding turn of the seasons. The priest's hands, gnarled like ancient roots, extended to receive the katana. And in that exchange, he felt the weight of 1,000 unspoken prayers. For the steel to never thirst again, for its edge to remain unbroken by violence, for it to serve as a bridge between the earthly and the divine. Outside, a gust of wind stirred the sakura blossoms, their petals falling like snow. And he remembered the old belief that each bloom was a soul returning to the gods. His breath slowed, matching the cadence of the priest's chant. And in that harmony, he found it the peace that had eluded him in battle, the stillness that came not from the absence of conflict, but from the certainty that his hands had finally learned to create instead of destroy. The clang of the shrine's bell resonated through the air, deep and clear as a mountain stream. And as he bowed low, forehead grazing the wood, he released the last shadow of his past into the blade's gleaming edge, knowing it would carry his hope forward, one sacred cut at a time. As the last sliver of crimson sun bled into the horizon, casting long shadows across the cobbled streets, the retired samurai, now a blacksmith of ceremony, stepped beneath the worn wooden eaves of his workshop. The rhythmic clatter of his geta sandals slowing to a halt, the air, sharp with the evening chill, carried the faint scent of charcoal lingering from the day's forge, mingling with the sweetness of fresh tatami mats inside. He knelt at the threshold, fingers brushing the smooth, sun-warmed wood of the doorway, its grain worn smooth by years of passing hands. The silence here was different from the battlefields, no distant clash of steel or cries of men. Just the whisper of wind through bamboo and the occasional rustle of silk, as he shifted. Inside, the dim glow of a single lantern painted the walls in flickering gold, illuminating the row of completed blades resting on their stand, their curved edges catching the light like frozen moonlight. Each one bore no nicks, no stains of war, only perfect stillness. His calloused hands trembled slightly as he lifted a newly finished wakizashi, its polished surface so flawless it mirrored the lines of his face deeper now, etched not just by time, but by the ghosts he'd carried since he last drew a blade in anger. He exhaled slowly, the scent of bitter matcha from his morning ritual still faint on his breath. And for a moment, he was back in the dojo of his youth, the sting of sweat in his eyes, the ache of his master's bamboo rod striking his shoulders for a misplaced cut. The memory tightened his chest, but the weight of the ceremonial blade in his hands grounded him. This was not a weapon, but a prayer. His fingertips traced the leather-wrapped hilt, each stitch a silent plea for peace, each fold of steel a tribute to the lives he could not untake. The forge's embers still pulsed faintly in the corner, their fading heat a reminder of the day's labor, of the countless hours spent folding and refolding metal. As if by sheer repetition, he could smooth the creases in his own soul. Outside, the first stars pricked the sky, and the distant cry of a night heron echoed over the river. He closed his eyes, listening to the rhythmic creak of the bamboo grove, its sway a lullaby older than empires. Tomorrow, another blade would take shape under his hands, perhaps one that would grace a shrine or a wedding, a symbol of unity rather than division. For now, he knelt in the quiet, the weight of his past and the lightness of his purpose balanced like the perfect blade, honed not for splitting flesh, but for cutting through the twilight of regret, one measured breath at a time. The retired samurai kneels upon the sun-warmed tatami, fingers lingering on the polished grain of the wooden floor, as the evening unfurls around him like an ink stroke across parchment. The scent of fresh matcha rises in curling steam from the chowin cradled between his palms, a bitter solace that stains his tongue and anchors him to the stillness. Outside, the eaves whisper with the restless breath of the wind, carrying the dry rustle of maple leaves against cobblestones, the distant clatter of geta receding into the night. A cricket sings by the engawa, its rhythmic chirp a thread woven into the loom of twilight. He closes his eyes, letting the sound seep into him, the creak of aged wood settling, the paper-thin flutter of a moth against the lantern's glow, until they dissolve into the hollow silence beneath his ribs, that old, familiar emptiness where battle cries once echoed. His hands, calloused from decades of gripping swords and hammers alike, lie motionless on his thighs, yet the ghost of a tremor flickers through his right thumb, the remnant of a duel long past where steel had sung its scarlet song. The memory rises unbidden, the hiss of a blade drawn swiftly as winter wind, the way blood pooled black in moonlight. He exhales, slow as a forging bellows, and reaches for the katana resting on the stand beside him, not to wield, but to trace the folded steel with a fingertip, feeling the ripple of its soul beneath the lacquered saya. This blade, like all he crafts now, will never taste flesh. Its edge is honed for ceremony, its hammer a prayer etched in fire. The lanterns flame gutters, casting swaying shadows that dance like phantoms across the shoji screens, and for a heartbeat, the air thickens with the copper scent of old battlefields. But then the wind shifts, carrying the faint perfume of chrysanthemums from the temple grounds, and the moment fractures. He tilts his head, listening as the temple bell tolls somewhere beyond the mist, a sound that has measured his days since he hung up his daisho. The stars, veiled by drifting clouds, watch as they have for centuries, indifferent to the wars of men. His thumb stills, the tea cools, and in the space between breaths he finds it, not forgiveness, nor forgetting, but the fragile truce of a craftsman who has learned to knead peace into steel, folding it layer by layer, as patiently as the seasons turn. The retired samurai, now a blacksmith of ceremonial blades, lay upon his tatami mat, the clean scent of dried straw and faint incense lingering in the air like a whispered prayer. Outside, the night was still, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the garden, a sound that once might have set his hand twitching toward a sword that was no longer there. The sharp, almost imperceptible whisper of a blade being drawn had once been as familiar to him as his own breath. But now, it existed only in memory, replaced by the softer melodies of his craft, the sigh of the bellows, the chime of hammer on steel, the quiet hiss of molten metal meeting water. His workshop lingered in his mind as he exhaled, the breath long and measured, the way he had been taught decades ago in the meditation halls of his youth. Beneath his fingers, the smooth, cool grain of the wooden floor grounded him, a contrast to the silken weight of his sleeping robe, its hem slightly frayed from years of wear. He had once worn armor, had felt the bite of winter through the gaps in lacquered plates. But now, there was only this simple cloth, the faint bitterness of green tea still on his tongue, the distant echo of geta sandals on cobblestones as the last of the evening's stragglers passed by his gate. His heart, so long coiled like a tense spring, had begun to unknot itself in these slow, quiet hours. Memories of battle rose sometimes, unbidden, the metallic tang of blood, the weight of a dying man's gaze, the way the dawn light could make a field of carnage look almost beautiful. But here, in the stillness, there was only the steady rhythm of his breath, the distant call of an owl, the knowledge that the blades he forged now would never taste violence. Each one carried his silent plea to the gods, folded into the steel like the layers of a blossom, a hope that the world might someday turn from fire and embrace stillness, as he had. The shifting moonlight through the shoji screen traced a fragile path across his hands, calloused but steady, no longer trembling as they once had when the ghosts of his past grew too loud. Tonight there was no specter to shake him, no unfinished reckoning lurking in the shadows. Only peace, deep and unexpected, settling over him like the first snow of winter, gentle, transformative. He slept, and for the first time in years, his dreams were light. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of dew-kissed bamboo and the distant murmur of the river as the retired samurai, now a blacksmith, opened his eyes to the pale gold light filtering through the paper shoji screens. The tatami beneath him smelled of fresh straw and sun-warmed wood, a comforting simplicity that grounded him as he lay still for a moment, listening to the quiet. A single breath, slow, deliberate, filled his lungs, and with it came the memory of other dawns, the metallic tang of blood in the air, the weight of a sword in his grip, the cries of battle that had once been his world. But now, the only blade he wielded was the one he forged, a silent testament to peace. The faint rustle of his cotton yukata against his skin was softer than the whisper of silk armor, and the smooth, cool wood of the floor beneath his bare feet bore no resemblance to the mud and grit of a battlefield. He knelt before the small altar in the corner, where incense curled in lazy spirals toward the ceiling, its sandalwood fragrance mingling with the bitter, earthy aroma of matcha steaming in a chowan beside it. His fingers, calloused and knotted from years of gripping a sword first to kill, now to create, trembled slightly as he lifted the bowl, the warmth seeping into his palms. The tea was sharp on his tongue, a reminder of discipline, of the way bitterness could sharpen clarity. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of geta on cobblestones signaled the waking village. But here, in this stillness, time stretched like molten steel, slow and fluid. He closed his eyes, and for a heartbeat, the ghost of his past flickered behind his lids, the flash of a rival's blade, the weight of lives taken, the unbearable lightness of survival. But then the breeze shifted, carrying the scent of cherry blossoms from the garden, and he exhaled, letting the memory dissolve like smoke. The forge awaited. Each step across the courtyard was measured, the gravel crunching softly underfoot, the morning sun painting the path in dappled gold. The workshop door slid open with a whisper, revealing the tools of his new calling. The anvil, solid and unyielding. The hammer, balanced perfectly in his grip. The charcoal, waiting to be stoked into life. As he knelt before the fire, the first orange embers blooming under his careful breath, he felt the old tension, the warrior's restless energy, the blacksmith's patient resolve twist like twin strands of steel in his chest. But today, as every day, he would fold them together, layer by layer, until they became something stronger, something that could cut through the darkness without drawing blood. The first strike of the hammer rang clear, a note of purpose echoing through the quiet dawn. This blade would not be wielded in anger. It would be a prayer, a covenant, a thing of beauty meant to honor, not destroy. And with each measured breath, each deliberate movement of his hands, he forged not just steel, but peace, one blade at a time.